Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on our latest Restless Presents event, which is the last event in the current series, I'm afraid. This evening's event is all about stress and anxiety management, something I think we could all probably do with right now after a year of living through the pandemic, and especially as we all begin to ease ourselves back into a more normal way of life. I am delighted to introduce you to Restless member Greg Harman, who joins us from Barnby Moor in East Yorkshire. Greg has more than 25 years of experience working in mental health, with qualifications in social and behavioural studies, mental health first aid, community mental health care, mindfulness, and life coaching. In 2015, Greg co-founded Second Thoughts, a regional charity promoting good mental health through one-to-one sessions and small group workshops. Whilst his charity is based in East Yorkshire, during the pandemic, Greg's work all moved online, and so he is now able to welcome people from all around the country. During tonight's event, Greg is going to talk to us about stress and anxiety management, and he will give us some tips on how to manage any stress and anxiety we might be experiencing in our own lives at the moment. So before I hand over to Greg, just a reminder of our usual housekeeping points. Please keep your video on if you're comfortable too. It's always that bit more personal when we can see your faces. Any technical issues, my colleague Gaetano is at your service to help. Thank you, Gaetano. Please put any comments in the chat box and he will assist you. And then with regards to questions throughout tonight's presentation, please pop any questions in the chat box as we go along. And at the end, I will pose those questions to Greg. So without further ado, Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Ash, and thanks everyone for coming along tonight. I really appreciate it. You've heard the saying, save the best till last. Well, they didn't. They lied. So here I am. So what I'm going to do now is share the screen so you'll be able to see a presentation that I'll use as a rough sort of a guide throughout the talk. And then hopefully you'll be able to think of a few questions along the way as we're going along. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. Yeah, is that coming through? Is that all right, Ash? Can you see that? Right, okay, so I'm Greg Harman, as Ash said, and I'm going to talk this evening about stress and anxiety. And people who we work with, our aim is to try and help people to have a good quality of life through having good mental health, which is far more than not having mental illness. It's having the resilience to bounce back when things go wrong. And over the last year and a half, boy, have things gone wrong. So it's building up your inner resilience and your ability to cope and get through the bad times and then enjoy some of the good times when they return. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the difference between stress and anxiety, because the two words that are often intermingled, people use one and perhaps they mean the other. So I'm going to start by looking at a dictionary definition, firstly, of the word stress. And the dictionary definition is response to external pressure. So we all have stresses every day. So under normal circumstances, if you have a job, you have the stresses of, for example, making sure that your alarm goes off in the morning, that your stuff's ready for you to get dressed and get ready and go to work. Hopefully your workload is something that you're able to cope with, and so on. So we all face these stresses, but some people manage more than others. Now, anxiety is a little bit different, and anxiety is the effects of excessive or prolonged stress, and that causes a feeling of fear. So that's if the stresses build where they seem relentless and they're just building one on top of another, or they become increasingly strong. So, for example, you can have anxiety if you live in fear of a relationship going wrong, or perhaps of redundancy or financial pressures, or low mood. Sometimes there's a definite reason for the anxiety. Sometimes, however, there isn't. And some of the people I work with, you think, well, perhaps given the life situation, maybe there could be physical illness, or perhaps there may be other factors impacting on them, you can understand why they are feeling anxious. But for some people, everything seems to be in place. Everything seems to be going well, and they may have a strong family unit, live in a nice area, perhaps have a good job, no financial problems, but they still have these feelings of anxiety. And the brutal truth of it is that this can strike randomly. It's just 1 in 4 people who will have some kind of a mental health problem during the course of their lives. Now, that could be anything from reactive depression, given a life event, perhaps bereavement, something like that, through to perhaps something that's a little bit more longer term, something psychotic, for example, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and so on. But the 1 in 4 figure that's quoted is only based on the number of people who actually go and seek help. So they approach the GP. So in reality, I think, and I would suspect that the figure is much higher than that. And my own personal opinion, my humble opinion, is it's probably more like 1 in 2 people, actually. So anxiety is the effect of excessive or prolonged stress causing fear, but is stress always bad? Well, the answer to that actually is no. If you think about going to a theme park like Alton Towers, or perhaps watching a horror film, you actually pay to be frightened to death, basically, for a couple of hours or half a day or whatever, and you're forking out good money to be scared out of your wits. So that actually is, or can be, excessive, but there is one good reason why that isn't as terrifying as everyday stuff, and that is basically because we still have some control. We exercise that control. So when we go on a ride at Alton Towers, we know after 15 minutes, or perhaps if they need the money after 5 minutes, that the ride will end, you'll be able to get off it, and that you'll be able to calm down again, and that you're relatively safe whilst you're on there, although admittedly some accidents have happened. And similarly with a horror film, with a horror movie, you know that after an hour and a half or 2 hours, that the film will end, and so you're regaining that control all the time. So the problem becomes exacerbated when you lose that control and feel that you're being sort of swept along, and life is happening to you, not with you. So an analogy that I use often is in graphic form, really, and it's a picture of a ship. It's like an old Spanish galleon, and it's called the HMS Me. So that's you and your life. And if you see there, it's on the sea of life, and you see the sharks swimming around. So there may be the sharks of unemployment, bereavement, loss of work, or arguments with other people, perhaps friend, family, or neighbours, and so on. And if you see on the ship, it's held onto the shoreline by 3 anchors. And those 3 anchors that we all have in our lives, some to a stronger degree than others, but the 3 anchors are, the first one is relationships. So that's how you are with other people, not necessarily intimate relationships, although they do come into that, but it's relationships with other people in your family, your friends, your neighbours, perhaps workmates, and so on. The anchor in the centre at the bottom is called home, and that's where you live at any one time. So that's providing that you've got a home base which is relatively secure, somewhere you can go and call home on a night, every night, and you feel reasonably safe, then that's that anchor. And the third one on the right-hand side is called the vacation anchor. Now that's what you do, and it may well be that you do some voluntary work, or you have a hobby that's time-consuming. You may have retired and have a hobby that can be pretty much full-time, full-on, or it could be voluntary work, or perhaps it could be education. Now, when I've done this type of presentation before for universities, there's a big dropout with university students at the end of year 1. And the significant reason for that is that all of these anchors become loose. So if you think about somebody when they first go to university, they leave home perhaps for the first time. They go and live in student accommodation with a whole raft of new people who they've never met before. They may have to do a part-time job somewhere to try and add to their income so they can survive. And they're also mixing with other people doing the course, doing the studying as well. So The relationships have all changed, the home life's changed, and the vocation, they've gone from being a school child basically to being a young adult. And university is a totally different way of life. It's a coming of age, as it were. So all of those three anchors are disrupted, they're all up, and they have to be thrown down again so that there's some stability. Now, a lot of students, most students are okay with that, but many of them find it a big culture shock and drop out at the end of the first year. So that's in graphic form, really, how I tend to describe how people are generally in the day-to-day lives. Now, if you look on the front end of the ship, is it called the bowsprit? Forgive me if there are any nautical people here, but you see an additional anchor there that's labelled agency. Now, the agency could be perhaps, it could be the NHS, it could be some support workers, it could perhaps be a charity, it might be a self-help group, it could be a member of the family or something, but it's someone who's there to provide additional support as well as to these three main anchors. So it's often prudent to have that extra anchor in place and to throw that down as and when it's needed. So you read every day of the week, perhaps if anybody still gets newspapers, or you'll see online, about stories about, for example, where people have lost everything and they managed to recover with the help and support of charities. Some people may have some drink dependency or perhaps drug dependency, and they turn their lives around through the support of a charity, an alternative charity. So that's what that anchor is all about, this agency, and it's there for when things go wrong. But very importantly, the thing to remember is that you're not just a passenger on this ship, it's your ship, you're the captain. So you need to keep an eye on it and which way you're headed, and not just be swept along and overwrought by the sea of life. So if we look at causes of stress, now one of the things that I always say when you're looking at causes of stress is all of our lives are different. We all are individual people, but this is a catch-all. It's not color-coded for any specific reason. But this was a group that we did some work with in Hull, and we asked the people there what caused problems for them, what caused stress. And I think we can all resonate with some or more of these things on this graphic. So it could be work, health, sleep. I'm just looking at the ones, not necessarily in a specific order, but it could be perhaps life generally, or children, work-home balance, not having much money, where you live, and so on. But this came up quite a lot. And it was that people feel that they're their own cause of stress because the expectancy, their expectations are too high. They're setting the targets that high that they constantly feel they're failing, and then sort of beat yourself up when you don't. So it came up quite often, and still continues to come up quite often, that yeah, we can be our own worst critic. Now, when stress becomes or triggers or trips over into becoming anxiety, it can often be triggered by something that's not real. I'll give you an example there. If you think about perhaps as a child and you're riding on a bicycle and going along to the shops for your mum, and as you're riding along on your bicycle, depending on your age, but it might be you hear Tom Jones singing, somebody's in the garden, they have the radio on, and they play a Tom Jones song, and then you carry on your bicycle, you go around the corner, somebody with a red jacket walks in front of you, and then a dog jumps out, takes a big chunk out your leg, you fall off your bike and you're terribly hurt. It could be in the future that whenever you see someone in a red coat, or if you ever hear a Tom Jones song, or if you ever in fact ride a bicycle, that part of the brain called the amygdala, which is a very primitive part of the brain, its role is sort of like a fire alarm, if you like. It's to identify any threat or any risk to you. Now, the amygdala doesn't rationalize. I don't want to get too technical with this because we could do part of a psychology degree here, but the amygdala is part of the brain that actually just trips the warning bell, if you like. So any of those things in later life could make you feel very uneasy. And when the amygdala trips for a definite reason that's a real reason, for example, if someone's running after you to attack you or whatever, then you need that. You need to have that response that's triggered, which is called flight or fight, that you may have heard of. And that needs to happen for you to either combat the threat or to escape it. But sometimes it goes wrong, and sometimes it can be called an amygdala hijack. And that's when the amygdala misreads a situation because it doesn't think things through. So, for example, with the example I just gave you about riding to the shop on your bicycle and being injured, the amygdala doesn't think, well, no, you're perhaps 20, 30, 40 years older, and that threat's not real. And it could be just someone listening to some music, and that isn't connected. All the amygdala does is just to say, this was one of the elements when you had a negative outcome or a bad outcome, and it's happening again, and it just hypes you up. So that's called an amygdala hijack when it goes wrong, but the impact's exactly the same as when the threat's real. So what happens then is you have a panic attack or heightened anxiety. It could be called, depending on how severe it is. Now, when the amygdala trips your body into responding into the flight or fight response, certain things happen in the body. And first of all, there's a boost of adrenaline into the bloodstream. And that's to power your muscles up, and that's to enable you to combat the threat or to escape it. And also, you start to breathe more rapidly because you need to put more oxygen into the bloodstream to power up the muscles. So you may have seen in the past where people used to get, if they were having a panic attack, somebody give them a brown paper bag, and they'd breathe into the paper bag and then inhale. And that's so that you're re-inhaling the carbon dioxide to reduce oxygen levels slightly in the brain, because oxygen is a stimulant. And when you hyperventilate, you feel giddy and lightheaded. So your other senses will all hype up too. So your vision improves, and you're looking for additional threats because you're feeling at risk. Your hearing seems to be really acute, and you can hear things, the slightest little noise, and you're jumpy and on edge. But also, as well as these things happening that don't normally happen, some bodily functions cease because they're not necessary. So, for example, saliva production stops, so your mouth dries out, which is a good point for me to have a little drink of water. Never in the history of mankind has anyone ever said, don't attack me just yet, I just need to have a bag of crisps. You don't need to have saliva, you don't need to eat anything. And similarly, your stomach and the bowels stop working temporarily. Now, the reason for that is the energy is redeployed to your muscles. So any unnecessary or what would be deemed to be unnecessary or of secondary importance bodily functions stop, because you don't need to do those at that time. You just need to be able to escape the threat, the risk. When the adrenaline gets into your bloodstream, you might feel shaky, but you generally feel really hyped up. Your pulse rate increases, heart rate increases, and it really is very, very scary if anyone's had one of these things. So sometimes people have presented at accident and emergency units because they've had a panic attack. And what normally happens, if you go there, or if an ambulance has been called, which sometimes is the case, then they need to rule out things that it isn't. It can seem at the time when you're having a panic attack, and I've had some of these myself. I've had anxiety and depression myself in the past, by the way, and learned to manage it, and that's what drew me to work in this field. So I understand some of what people feel like, although everybody's story is very different. But at the hospitals or in the ambulance, they may put you on an EEG, they'll check blood pressure, they'll check pulse rate and so on, just to rule out that it isn't anything physical. And then sometimes they may keep people in overnight just to observe them. But the good news is that no one's ever died of a panic attack. They can't be fatal for you, but it's very, very terrifying when you do have them. Now, often, if people don't know what a panic attack is, it can be even more frightening because you've no idea what's done it, what's caused it. If you could identify the root cause, so for example, using the analogy that I used earlier about going to the shop, if you realized that the trigger was listening to Tom Jones music, then you could understand why it's happening, and it takes all the power away from that trigger. But very often the triggers are innocuous, they're just lurking in the background, and we never know what they are. So that's what a panic attack is. Now, there can be sometimes a level of ignorance, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, it's not an insult, but sometimes ignorance can add to fear. And when people understand what a panic attack is and what's happening to them physiologically, that can reduce the impacts of it. So on this graph I've just put there, on the vertical axis, the one that's going up, that just is the anxiety level. How bad does it feel? And along the horizontal axis, along the bottom, is how long it lasts, how bad you're feeling. So the first time when someone has a panic attack, it's terrifying and it seems to last forever. But then once you understand what's doing it and what's happening to you, the second time, third time, fourth time, it doesn't mean that you'll never have one again. But when you understand what they are, they're a little bit easier to cope with. Now, one way to cope with them is to use some grounding skills. And I'll be going over these grounding skills in about 20 minutes, something like that. So I'm not just going to say what causes all this and then leave you to it. I will give you some tips and help to be able to deal with it. So talking about whether a threat's real or just perceived, I'm going to do a little exercise, and I'd like you to do it in your head, because there are so many people. Normally when we're meeting in person, we'd ask people to do this and shout a word out, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. But because this is online, I just want you to do this in your head. So it's called the stroop effect. And what I'd like you to do, just in your own head, is just shout out the colour of the letters that appear, the colour of the word that appears. Not what the word says, forget what the word says, but the colour of the letters. So I'll count this down from 3 to 1, and then I'll click it and they'll just start appearing on the screen. So if you just go through it in your head. So 3, 2, 1. So there you go. It's easy to do, isn't it? Really simple. So let's have another go. But remember, it's the colour of the letters, not what the word says, just the colour of the letters. And I'll count down again. 3, 2, 1. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I did that, and indeed whenever I do that, even despite having done it probably thousands of times now, I find it's quite disconcerting when you go through this and going through it when the words are actually colours themselves. So why is it difficult to do it? And basically, it's because there's conflict. Part of your brain is telling you to actually read the word, and the other part is telling you to say the actual colour, which is fine, and you can sort of do it to a degree early on. But then when you get one wrong, then you start sort of going back and saying, no, hang on a minute, you know, it was red, no, it was blue. And particularly if you're in a room with people, and normally we do these workshops where there are perhaps 6 people all together in a room, physically all together. And when somebody shouts out the wrong word, you can guarantee that makes it even more confusing. And by the time you get to the end of it, everybody's saying every colour under the sun. So it's not that you're going mad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that you have this conflict going on in your mind, with part of your mind telling you one thing and part of your mind telling you another. And that in its simplest form is basically what's happened when you're having this amygdala hijack, when you're feeling under threat, under severe threat, and having a panic attack for no real concrete reason, but just because you get that gut feeling that something's not quite right. And it's quite common. Many people have that issue. So you're not on your own. Now, at the end, I will have, I'll put details of the charity's website on. So if anybody wants to contact me either through Stressless or through the charity, be more than happy to pass on additional advice and whatever support I can do. So I'm going to look now at ways that we can manage. I just see someone has a raised hand. If I can just ask if you have any questions, if you'd like to put it in the chat, and then Ash will be asking questions at the end. Okay. So I'm going to talk now about managing heightened anxiety and panic attacks. So this is a quote that I'll often use, is don't think about zebras. The minute I say don't think about zebras, you automatically picture a zebra. It's inevitable. It's impossible to do anything else. And similarly, if you think you want to avoid being anxious or avoid worrying by thinking, right, I'm not going to worry, I'm not going to become anxious, it's impossible. Because the minute the word enters your head, all the auto responses come on. So anxiety is there, it's lingering there, and you're going to feel on edge. So the way basically to deal with not think about a zebra is to think about a hippopotamus or an elephant or a giraffe or a monkey, anything at all, but don't think about the zebras. So try not to block it out, because it is literally, I'm using an analogy or comparison with all these animals, but it is the elephant in the room. It's something that's there. So to try and block it by thinking you're going to block it, you're just focusing on it all the time. So I'll go through now about thinking about different ways that you can deal with it. And these are different grounding skills. Now, grounding skills are used largely with, you may have come across this in the past, many of you will, I'm sure, but mindfulness. Mindfulness originally was a Buddhist technique originally, but it's not now. It's become far more mainstream and widespread. And a lot of people practice mindfulness. The methods that we try and use to support people with the charity are really a mixture of all sorts of different schools of thought. So some of it's mindfulness, some of it's cognitive behavioral therapy that some of you may have come across in the past. Some of it is a little bit of using more direct psychological systems, so things like neuro-linguistic programming, which is choice of words and imagery. Some of it is some life coaching. Some of it is called dialectical behavioral therapy. But what it is basically is a big mix and match, because as I said at the beginning, we're all very individual. And I think the support system that we need needs to be tailored to each of us individually. So it's not a question of one school of thought fits all. And I think people can cherry pick bits that work for them from these different approaches to supporting people. So the first grounding skill, and these will be on a PDF handout that I'll pass through to Gaetano at the end, and he'll be able to email you this. So there'll be a summary of this this presentation at the end for you, with some links on there as well. So the first one is look at some upbeat news, but none of the doom and gloom stuff that's generally on. I mean, if you look at the news bulletins during the course of the day, they're enough to depress anyone. At one time, news bulletins always used to end on an upbeat story, but they seem to have stopped doing that now. So yes, there's a lot of serious stuff going on in the world, but I think we all need to sort of restrict the time that we spend looking at the news. But you can find a lot of stuff that's more upbeat, particularly online. And because everyone who's here is doing this via Zoom, you're all IT savvy enough to sort of look for stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for all the little, you know, looking at cats and pets and stuff on YouTube. Anything at all that's upbeat and just elevates your mood. But try and look for the more upbeat stuff and something that's fun, not all the dire stuff that's really downbeat. The second thing you can do is just breathing slowly and steady. Now, all mindfulness is all based on getting your breathing under control first. Now, for some people, that's not as easy as it sounds. You think, well, you should be good at breathing now. You've had God knows how many years practice, but it doesn't quite pan out like that. It can often be, once again, don't think about zebras. The minute you think about breathing, you feel on edge because you're trying to moderate your breathing. So the secret really is just to feel relaxed. So just to sort of rest your head back and just let things slow down gently, rather than thinking I have to breathe in for 10 seconds and breathe out for 10 seconds and so on. And the other thing you can do is to visualize all your fear and angst and anxiety evaporating with each breath out. So imagine that there's a big fluffy white cloud overhead, and you sat back, and every breath, every time you exhale, some of the anxiety and fear and angst is leaving you and evaporating with your breath and just joining the cloud and just drifting off. Now that is one technique that works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, and it might not work for you, but it's certainly worth trying. The next one, called two up here. The next one is trace your hands against any physical outline of your body. So this is, for example, feel the material of your top or your trousers or skirt or whatever it is you have, and just think, what material is it? Where did I get it from? Where did I buy this? How long have I had it? Have I got anything else in similar material? And the whole idea of all this stuff, it's called grounding, because it's using your senses to bring you back to here and now. So when our anxiety levels rise, it's often because we drift off into this catastrophizing mode where we're thinking, oh God, I bet this is going to go wrong, or we're overanalyzing stuff that's happened maybe during the day, or maybe even that week, or perhaps 15 years ago. That can be a problem as well, but we overanalyze. So it's to bring you back to here and now. So by using the sense of touch, by feeling the material, it once again can ground you. It can help to call a friend and have a chat. And one of the beauties of websites like Restless is that there are people around all the time, and you can leave a message, and I've engaged in a few chats on here, and it's really interesting conversation. So I think the vast majority of people are here for, I don't mean just tonight, I mean generally on the site, are here for the same reason, that they all want to just engage with other people and just have a chat and get to know the folk. And there are obviously the regional groups as well, that's depending on which area you live in. But you can still call a friend and have a chat on the telephone. What I would suggest, if you're not feeling totally at ease with a telephone, and many people don't because they have phone anxiety, is just to make a few bullet point notes before you make the call. So you can perhaps just say, where you've been, have you done anything that day? Have you got anything that you need to do? Has anything particular happened? It might be you want to chat about something that's been on TV or the weather, but just make a few notes, and then that avoids you drying up when you pick the phone up and thinking, oh God, what am I going to talk about? There are, if you look on our website, when you have an opportunity to, a lot of video logs that we've done that cover various subjects, ranging from relaxation techniques through to things like telephone anxiety, using social media, controlling anger, and so on. So be able to go on there and have a look, and some of those you may find helpful too. The next tip is eat or drink something. That's to use basically the sense of taste. And it is the thing that you're eating or drinking hot. Is it cold? Is it sweet? Is it sour? What flavour is it? Where did you get it from? Does it remind you of anything? And once again, it's using one of your senses for that. Try and laugh if you can. And that's, once again, easier said than done. And it might be that it's really difficult because your mood's been really low. But if you have a favourite comedy, perhaps, or something that you found amusing, I'll give you an example. There is on Facebook, there's a Tim Vine joke appreciation society, and some of the jokes are really corny. I'll give you an example of one. And it's, I remember when I lost my job at the bank over a misunderstanding, a lady came in and asked if I could check her balance. So I pushed her over. Now, really stupid, idiotic joke, a juvenile joke. But if your mood's really low, it can be something that's really daft, just something silly that could just lift your mood temporarily. And if you do laugh, even if it's for a few seconds, my opinion is that one laugh is worth 1,000 tablets. I'm not knocking medication, but certainly if you can laugh, even if it's just for a short time, that can help to lift your mood. Take a look outside. Just look through your window, not on a night, obviously, when it's dark, but count the number of trees or the number of cars or the number of street signs. Can you see any animals? Can you see any birds? Anything at all that's switching your focus from going inward and worrying you and focusing on doubts and low mood to something that's bringing you back to here and now, things that are happening right now. Exercise is very helpful. It can be anything from gentle yoga or armchair exercises, and there's a whole load of information online about how to do stuff like this. A lot of people are providing this free of charge. or even just go for a gentle stroll, even if it's just at the end of your road, and then just use your senses while you're out. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? And once again, using your senses to bring you back to right there and then, because here and now is what we have control over. We can't alter things that have happened in the past. We can't do things that have been undone, nor can we change anything that's happened either. So we need to focus on now and forward rather than getting pegged down with and dwelling on the past where we can. If you think of many children have a comfort blanket or a dummy or a soother, has the same effect. And it's basically that they find it comforting. So holding on to something like that may be helpful. When our daughter was very young, she used to have, she was very fond of a quilt that she had, a duvet cover. So when she outgrew it, and she used to drag this duvet cover thing, it was a full-size single bed all around with her. And my wife ended up actually cutting it up into little pieces, and she used to take a bit with her. And so for 2 or 3 years, she used that and found it extremely comforting. Excuse me, get a dry mouth with all this talking. Now, another thing that you can do is it's called substitution. And that's imagining yourself in somewhere that's familiar, that you know really well, and that you feel safe in. So, and you can actually engage it. The safety has a vibe to it. When you close your eyes and you visualize yourself in that place, it's a safe place that only you know, that you can retreat to, if you like. It's like a bolt hole. And there's a relaxation exercise that I've done, and there's a link at the end. So on the final page of the presentation, I'll pop that up and you'll be able to look at that link. And it'll also be on the PDF handout that I sent through to Gitana, so you'll be able to look at that when it's all done. Now, finally, and this is really powerful, you can write a letter to anxiety as though it's a person. Just visualize some horrible, horrendous person who's caused you the problems that you're having, and just visualize it as a horrible, nasty person, and write a letter to it. You can either do it on a laptop or on a web processor, or on a tablet, on a computer, or you can handwrite it. And I think in many ways, handwriting it is actually much more therapeutic. So you don't have to hold anything back. Use whatever colourful language that you want, and just let rip, just let it know, just write to this person and just say what's on your mind, all your anger, all your frustration, all the hate, just vent your spleen and let it all out. There's only you needs to read it unless you want anyone else to. So you can use whatever colourful language you like. If you choose to swear, that's entirely your prerogative. There's no problem with that. And then when you've finished it, you can either keep it. Some people decide to keep it. Some people dispose of it. Some people want to get rid of it. And that can be quite symbolic as well. So you could burn it, provided you do it safely outdoors, of course. Or you could shred it if you have a shredder. Or just tear it up into 1,000 pieces. It doesn't really matter, providing you do what suits you. So the reason to do that is that firstly, it lets it all out of your system. It externalizes the anger and all the frustration that's been building up perhaps for a long time. And secondly, it saves your subconscious the chore of keeping prompting you to take some action. Now, the subconscious part of the brain is the part of the brain that is there to keep you safe. And the subconscious, unfortunately, doesn't process or doesn't rationalize things. That's the frontal lobe. The subconscious is there in the background all the time, prompting you to take some action. So if the subconscious feels that you're under threat, then the subconscious will keep making you feel uneasy, because it requires you to take some action to make yourself safe. So by actually writing to this thing, write to this person, this, if you like, this image, this spectacle, or this representation of the thing that's causing you your anxiety, you're actually addressing that issue. So it can be really powerful. Now, what I want to do is very briefly, I'm aware of the time, so very briefly, I'm going to read you an example of a letter that one of the people who attended one of our online workshops wrote. It's not too long. And she says, "Dear anxiety, you've now been with me for 3.5 years, and to be honest, I've had enough of you taking my life over. As soon as I open my eyes in the morning, I feel you there. You've made getting out of bed and getting dressed an effort. You look back at me when I look in the mirror, laughing at me, and because of what you've made me become, my life isn't the same. I'm not the same as I was. I can't go outside without fear. I avoid people, hide from people. I don't give eye contact in case someone wants to talk to me. I can't go shopping anymore. I have panic attacks. I feel sick. I have palpitations, sweats, a dry mouth, and I find it difficult to move. Most days when I'm out walking my dog, I'm unable to cross the road. You've done this to me. My decision making throws me into a panic attack. Are the cars going to stop? What if? When is it safe? Etc. It's totally debilitating, so I avoid walking where I would normally have gone. If you're not happy with that, and I look at cars and I'm filled with anger, it makes me shout, wave my arms about when I see them going too fast or drivers doing things they shouldn't be doing. This happens in the car when I'm a passenger. I close my eyes, grounding, seeking my safe place, shouting out. I'm not allowed to drive anymore because of you. Anxiety had made my life a mess, a total mess. Where is the person I was? I can't do the things in my life that I love to do, like singing in a choir. I can't tolerate the noise and the number of people. The same goes for my job. I was working with children. I was once very sociable, happy and bubbly. I loved life. You've now taken that away from me. I truly hope you disappear completely out of my life. You're not a friend, you're a bully. Goodbye, good riddance. And that's really quite powerful. And the lady who wrote that, so did give me permission to read that. Obviously, you don't know who she is. We fully respect confidentiality. But she wrote that, and I think it was extremely brave of her to do it. But it is therapeutic, and it's something I've done myself. Once again, as with all the things that will help people or suggest to people, not everything works for everyone. But on the other hand, it's worth a try. Anything's worth a try, isn't it, to get an improved quality of life? Now, the relaxation exercise that I mentioned, you can listen to when time's convenient for you, and it runs for about 15 or 16 minutes. And it's best to do that when you have no distractions, so not with any kids running in the room, or perhaps if there's noisy traffic or something, or the telephone's going. If you have headphones, it's a bit easier, it's a bit more relaxed, and it's easier to focus on the relaxation exercise. And there's a link to it here. And there's also details of our website. So please feel free to visit the website. And as I said before, I will circulate the information on a PDF so that you'll be able to access it when Gitano emails you all individually. So thank you very much for bearing with me. I'm sorry I'm not being able to engage with you and hear you speaking. It's a little bit more difficult with a bigger audience, but I hope you take something from it. And I sincerely wish you all the very best of health, physical and mental health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was really, really helpful, especially all those practical points. I think I hope that people will be able to take away and use some of those. Kathy's saying thank you. There's a few thank yous coming through here, Greg. Does anyone have any questions for Greg? We will be sending through the slides afterwards. We can do that tomorrow.
About panic attacks.
Yes.
Hi, Esther.
Hello. About panic attacks, when you go out of your comfort zone somewhere, traveling to somewhere, and because I'm worried about that, because I'm going to go and visit my daughter, but it's in an area that I'm not really used to. Yeah.
Well, there are two things that you can do. One is to try and tackle it one little bit at a time. So for example, if it's going somewhere that you're not used to going, depending on how far it is, if you go a little bit of the distance, so you're familiar with that, perhaps one day or 1 week, and then just extend that a little bit further each time until it becomes more familiar to you. And then the other thing that you can do, it's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 approach. And what it is, if you feel yourself, if that uneasiness comes upon you, just look for 5 things that you can see and identify and say what they are. So if I was here now, it'd be laptop, curtains, window, files, bottle of water, printer, telephone, and then 4 things that you can hear. So it could be music, traffic, maybe bird song, depending on where you are, 3 things that you can touch. So material or wherever, it might be a brick wall, or depending on, you know, if you're in a car, for example, it could be the cloth seat, or it might be the dashboard or something like that. And then try and think of anything that you can hear, taste or smell. It might be a couple of smells that you can identify, or one thing that perhaps that you can taste if you've eaten something early in the day, or if you have a mint. And it's to focus on your senses once again, to bring you back in, rather than letting you sort of drift off and go into, you know, a disaster mode. And then finally, the other thing is, if you try the relaxation exercise, once you've done that, you'll have a mental image of a place that feels safe and very familiar to you. So if you try that, and then there's a link that I use. What I suggest is that you hold a thumb and a finger together while you're doing that. And as you're visualizing that safe place, if you do that, it can help to trigger that feeling of familiarity and comfort, so that you can visualize yourself being there, and it just slows things down for a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so it's worth a try. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It's okay. I hope it goes well. Hope your journey goes well.
Yeah. Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, good. I'm sure you'll be fine. Okay.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for being brave enough to speak as well. I think that's the first time we've had a verbal question. So thank you for that.
So it's a lot of courage to do that, doesn't it, Ash?
Does.
So well done, yes.
Absolutely. We've had a question through on chat, Greg. Someone's saying that they've realized the cause of their anxiety might be I think their dog was attacked several months ago.
Right.
And the lady's wondering if every time she's taken her dog for a walk, that she's anxious underneath it, even though she's not having panic attacks.
Yeah, it could well be. I think there often is that sort of, sometimes it's a little bit innocuous, you don't know what it is. Sometimes it's a bit more obvious. But I think the way that is, if there's someone close by who she can talk to, a family member or a friend, who she can talk things over with, and then once again, just to test your comfort zone a little bit. So just to go for a short walk around, perhaps with someone who you can maybe hold a hand or put your arm in theirs or whatever, just so you feel safe. And then gradually you begin to desensitize. Once you sort of, it's just a little bit dipping your toe in the water again and getting used to it again, you know, and building up your resilience and your courage to be able to address it. But often, once you can identify the thing that is causing the issue, it tends to lose its potency. It's not as powerful because it's not hiding all the time. You can see it and address it, think, you know, God, yeah, that's what it is. You know, I understand why I'm feeling like that now.
Yeah, I feel that. Thank you.
It's okay. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
And sometimes how amazing that penny has dropped for you just from taking this time out for this hour this evening. So that's really amazing. Alison, you're holding up your hand. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to, because I particularly wanted to come on tonight on behalf of my son, actually, who's 25 and starts to struggle with anxiety. Is it worth trying, like you just said, maybe trying to investigate maybe the initial cause? I know it can be innocuous and very hard to pin down, but does it like hypnotherapy help?
It can do. I think hypnotherapy works really well with a lot of people. And it can do that, because regressive hypnosis can sort of take you back. And similarly with counselling can help as well. The approach that we use with our charity is, it's the nearest sort of blanket term. It's called human givens, and it's the human givens is solution focused therapy. So it's looking at now and forward rather than now and back. But counselling can help to look back and to identify what the triggers are and what's caused it. So that can help many people. But everybody's different, you know, so it's just finding out what works best for you, really, you know.
Okay.
So, yeah. Might be worth a try.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Right.
Greg, off the back of Alison's question, actually, I have a question, because I have a few people in my life who have anxiety problems, and just based on all the different solutions or tools that you've suggested this evening, and you're mentioning it's very personal to people, and they should trial and error and see what works best for them. What would you say about the best way to support another person who might not have the tools, but as a support person, how can you, what's the best way to go about trial and erroring for them?
I think the first thing to do is never to be critical, because it sometimes you can fall into the trap of saying, "Oh, come on, pull yourself together, and you need to be stronger," and all those sort of things tend not to be helpful, because people feel guilty for feeling bad anyway. So if they feel that someone's having a pop at them for feeling like that, they can withdraw even more and feel that they're being penalised for going through a bad time. So the best way to support someone is, there are a few things that you can say to them. One is, I can see it's really difficult. I can see that it's hard for you to talk, but I'm here. I want to listen. I want to help. The second thing is to say, just take your time. Just tell me a little bit at a time. And if you feel upset, if you feel that you need to, shed a few tears, I'm here for you, because I really do want to help. I want to listen. Don't try and have all the answers, but you can help to identify sources of answers. So it could help, for example, depending on where you live in the country, to identify different organisations, charities, online support systems and structures that there are in place will be able to provide help. So it may be one of the regional mind organisations or a self-help group. Sometimes there are various organisations called survivors, and just to sort of be able to help them to access additional support. But it's being there, really. It's not, for example, an analogy or a story that I've had in the past. It's where if you're sat in a light room and somebody's sat in a dark room in the next room, it's not for you to drag them into the light. It's for you to go and sit in the dark with them, And so it's just sort of being there, and them knowing that they feel safe and that you're on their side. And I don't mean sort of, wrapping them up in cotton wool or something. It's good to try and encourage them to push the comfort zone a little bit, but when they feel strong enough, So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And someone else loves the light room, dark room. Yes, that's a really, really helpful analogy. Thank you. Another question on the chat, Greg, is this person has been waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, most mornings, which must be horrible. And it starts a conversation in their heads about all the anxieties across their life, and keeps them awake for a couple of hours throughout the night. So they're obviously tired in the morning. What about that night time, that when it's dark and lonely, you probably feel like you're the only person that's wide awake?
You do, yeah. And it's this, don't think about zebras again. If you go to bed on it, I'm not going to do that tonight. It's in your mind when you go to sleep, and invariably you wake up with it. And the problem why that occurs at that time of night is because there's no external stimulus. There's no noise, there's nothing going on, there's no TV, there's no traffic, it's just you and the dead of night, just the absolute quiet. So you wake up and then you start to go over these problems and you start mulling it over, perhaps something that's happened recently. Sometimes it's something that's happened years and years ago. So the really important thing is to try and get everything in place before you go to bed. So make sure that you're blocking out any external light. If you have a clock that lights up, turn it facing the other way. You can always turn it around to check the time, but don't have it glaring in your face. Try and minimize the noise as much as possible. Don't go to bed until you're absolutely dog tired. Try and stay up till as near midnight as possible, and set your alarm for 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. It sounds horrendous, but you're actually just retraining your body, getting your body clock, circadian rhythm it's called, and you're just getting that back on track again. And the other thing is, if you do wake up and you're wide awake, don't lay there mulling it all, going over it all in your head. Get up and have a glass of, don't do any tea or coffee, don't have anything caffeinated, but just have a little glass of milk, put your radio on low, or if you have headphones, put those on, watch TV, or have a book, anything at all to start thinking about a rhino, not about the zebra. It's just to refocus, to send your thoughts in another direction. But if you just get into a routine of just laying there, regurgitating all this stuff, and it's all going through your head all the time, chances are that it just becomes a bad habit, and it's easy to get into that. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure that advice will help. Just wanted to give anyone else another opportunity to ask any other questions. I'm just looking around the screens to see if anyone looks like they want to. Yes, somebody else has suggested that listening to podcasts or apps like Calm can help.
That's a good,
as well.
good suggestion. Yeah, definitely. And hopefully, as I said, you know, with that link that I'll send through and that was on the last slide, that our relaxation technique, that's it's online now. It's actually a YouTube video, and there's a lot of other stuff on our website, things like sleeping tips. So there's a lot of different stuff on there that people can just access, and that's obviously permanently live. So if anybody needs to access that during the night, you know, that's absolutely fine too.
Yeah.
But there are some great apps. It's just a question of sort of, you know, searching for what there is really. Yeah. Talking books is another one as well. That if you get talking books where, providing you put headphones on, it doesn't interrupt or make you feel uncomfortable when you're laid down. Just to take your mind off, you know, stop you going inward all the time, just keep you refocused.
Brilliant. Greg, thank you. So people are welcome to contact you through your website, through Restless. Thank you so much for your presentation this evening, and thank you to everyone who's attended. We hope it's been helpful. We hope you've enjoyed the Restless Presents series this time around, and look out for more from us at some stage in the not too distant future. And have a lovely rest of your evenings, everyone. Thank you.